When did TV stop romanticizing cities? For a long time, television always treated cities like fantasies. New York was always about ambition driven by hard work and grit, and LA on the opposite end was always about dreams to make it creatively, fueled by your image. And then Donald Glover's Atlanta showed up and quietly changed the rules. Atlanta wasn't interested in selling a city, it was interested in exposing how a city functions, how it behaves with ambition, relationships, and emotional survival through the lens of Paperboy, but it didn't explain Atlanta, it just let it operate like a system, so now we know how the city works, in a similar system like The Wire, where The Wire actually delves into the nitty and gritty of how the city works. Atlanta just shows you the full scope and lens, it doesn't take apart bits and pieces like The Wire does. And that shift didn't create a genre per se, but it gave shows permission to exist. And you can see that clearly with I Love LA and Adults, two comedies that use cities in completely different ways. I Love LA obviously about Los Angeles, and Adults about New York City. Let's take a look at I Love LA. The first thing to understand about I Love LA is that it doesn't care about portraying authentic native LA life, not about the people who really are LA natives or the culture really of LA. And that's not a blind spot of the show, it's actually the point of the show. The show isn't about LA as a hometown, it's about influencer culture, corporate creativity, and identity marketplace that LA exports to the world. LA isn't a place here, it's a machine that focuses on image and appearance. So image is currency, nepotism is infrastructure, relationships are proximity based, and identity is constantly optimized. You go to a party, it's not about making friends, it's more about making networking opportunities. Who can help me? I'm not gonna say hi to you unless there's some type of interest for me. It's not how are you from a genuine sense, it's how are you and what do you offer that I can use myself. We even see this with Rachel, who works as a marketing manager for a social media marketing agency for influencers. Mouthful. She is constantly surrounded by people whose entire lives revolve around visibility. Her friendship with Talia feels fake, not because Talia is malicious per se, but because authenticity doesn't survive well inside this ecosystem. One of the sharpest jokes comes really early on from a character casually reveals she's the VP of Creative Projects and only later mentions her dad appointing her, and nobody reacts. And that silence says a lot about the show, because that's literally the joke. This is LA as a system and not a city, and that framing is straight out of Atlanta's playbook. Atlanta shows how over time a city can change people, how its influence slowly shifts your ideology and beliefs. And it's not something that someone just simply moves through a city and kind of goes through the motions. And I see I Love LA starting to do that same logic. Episode 4 makes this pretty unmistakable, right? The pacing slows, the humor quiets down, and then the episode becomes less about jokes and more about mirrors. Rachel's boss, as an example, doesn't just manage her, she wants to recreate herself through her, and she's a living cautionary tale what Rachel Sennett, or sorry, Maya, will be in the future. And funny enough, Rachel actually sees it and recognizes it, and she does understand that to an extent that her boss wants her to be her, but that awareness doesn't equal escape in that sense. You could be as aware as you want, but if you don't want to change anything, then what's even the point? Because at least to Maya, she doesn't look at that as necessarily a bad thing. To get a better sense of how the two ideologies or many different ideologies in LA works, comes from the two characters Charlie and Lucas. So for some context, Charlie is Maya's friend. He's a fashion stylist for influencers and creatives. Also, he comes off probably the most superficial in their little friend group. While Lucas, on the other hand, is this trendy Christian singer on TikTok, so he is an influence in a sense and this piques Charlie's interest. But he also lives a pretty honest life. One could say a Christian life, funny enough. He's not transactional and he tries to see the good in everyone, kind of believes in that whole self-improvement thing. And the best part about Lucas is you could tell he's someone the city hasn't consumed yet. He doesn't feel like he's from LA at all. He could be from Minneapolis or Seattle or anywhere that doesn't require his constant imaging and self-branding just to exist. He isn't cloud chasing, he isn't managing perception, he just protects his inner life, and Charlie is the opposite of that. And Charlie is the complete opposite. His life is embedded in all of LA's systems, the influencer spaces, that creativity is fueled by corporate environments where drugs, relevance, and that what's next culture really just blur the lines. His anxiety is completely externalized. He's constantly trying to stay relevant and look for what's next. And Lucas doesn't really care about that. And this breath of fresh air is so new to Charlie. And that's why their relationship works, at the same time why it can't last, for those same reasons. They aren't incompatible people, they're living under opposite city views and lives, different brand identities. Charlie's world demands performance, Lucas's world survives on integrity. Charlie's arc reinforces his theme. When he talks about not having cloud at a funeral, it sounds so shallow until the show corrects that reading. Charlie is actually deeply affected by the death, but what he's afraid of isn't grief, it's being seen grieving to the public. In a city where every emotion risks becoming content, vulnerability feels unsafe. And that's why the most powerful moment isn't public, it's when Charlie cries alone. Visibility in this sense has replaced intimacy, not because he's empty, but because intimacy feels dangerous in the setting. That emotional displacement is straight out of Atlanta. Now, speaking on Atlanta, I did want to talk about Talia and how she compares to Paperboy, in the sense of their stalled ambition from Talia and this trapped ambition of Paperboy. They both occupy similar structural roles in their respective shows. They both present the systems they're inside, but rely on someone else to translate that resentment into motion. Paperboy hates the industry, the expectations, and all the performances that kind of comes along with being a jester in the rap game. But he does the work anyway. He shows up, he records, he tours. He understands the system is rigged and still plays along anyway. Talia hates being the influencer deep inside. The people, the lifestyle, the hollow validation, but she refuses the labor required to actually succeed inside it. It's, in a sense, it's lazy and a bit entitled. And what Talia really wants isn't just the influence, it's the recognition without that transformation. And Ellie doesn't offer that deal. Rachel becomes her earn. She absorbs the labor Talia avoids, does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Talia judges Rachel for participating, and Rachel resents Talia for refusing that. Just like Atlanta, the show refuses to pick a side. Ambition isn't noble, resistance isn't purity, there are survival strategies in this system, especially in LA. And while I was very brief about the comparison between Atlanta and I Love LA, I'm not going to go too deep into it. But another show I want to talk about that takes place in the city and it's kind of the main focus is Adults. This is like a Gen Z sitcom, and that's on Hulu. I just want to briefly cover it. Adults is a Gen Z sitcom that acknowledges it's really specifically only for Gen Z, right? New York here is incidental. The show intentionally generalizes post college life in a big city, roommates, underemployment, all this therapist talk, mental health, group chats. That experience isn't exclusive to New York anymore, per se. In New York, in this setting, it's just the most recognizable container to say, oh, they're in New York. They take the F train, they live in Queens. It doesn't feel like the driving force of the show. And this show isn't trying to interrogate the city, right? The transplant lens is deliberate in the sense Adults captures the Midwest to New York pipeline perfectly with the optimism, the self-importance, and belief that proximity equals progress. Think about all the translators that come from Ohio to New York post-college life. This is what this is about. This is from someone who's heard it being a New Yorker himself. And personally, I think that's kind of what makes this show weaker, because it doesn't really show an authentic New York lens, just this one avenue from that, right? With transplants moving, it doesn't feel like a native New Yorker show. The show could have been about people living in Miami or another big city or like Seattle. It doesn't feel native to New York. And that difference matters. You can move adults to Chicago, Austin, or Seattle, and the emotional logic would still pretty much hold. You couldn't move I Love LA anywhere else. Because I Love LA isn't about place, it's about the culture that place inherently represents. And adults isn't about culture, it's about the generation. Neither is wrong. They're both answering different questions, I think. But it's just something I wanted to point out. So, how does Atlanta fit really into all of this? Atlanta didn't change TV by being popular per se. It changed TV by proving that cities could be diagnostic tools and not fantasies that you could shape a show around effectively. And I guess Sex and the City also has done this in its previous sense. I'm curious to see how you guys would view Sex and the City and its impact on city shows in general, but I Love LA uses LA to examine influencer culture and the cost of being seen. Adults uses New York to universalize the post-college crisis that we're seeing with Gen Z. Both are intentional, both are honest, but only one treats the city as a system instead of just a backdrop. I think also with adults comparing to I Love LA. In some ways, you could say that some shows use cities to tell stories, and others use stories to expose the city, and that I think that's a big difference there. In Rachel Senntt's I Love LA really is a love letter to Atlanta. Um, I'm curious, is it just a white girl's version of Atlanta? I don't know, but curious to see how it aligns.